Even if we're just dancing in the dark. Ah! Ah! Where's the remote for the lights? Where's the remote for the lights? Okay, that is the last time I take the words of a Bruce Springsteen song literally. What is up, everybody? RandomRandomMan here, bringing you my review for Blinded by the Light. Inspired by the life of journalist Sarfraz Manzoor and based on his memoir, Greetings from Berry Park, Race, Religion, and Rock and Roll, the plot of this coming-of-age dramedy is set in 1987 Thatcherite Britain in a small town called Luton and follows Javeed, played by Vivek Kalra, a British Pakistani Muslim teenager who has his life changed forever after discovering the music of Bruce Springsteen. Going into this movie, I had some interest to see it, which only increased when I found out that this movie premiered at, say it with me now, the Sundance Film Festival from earlier this year. Yes, this is another movie that I am seeing and reviewing from that fest. It actually received a 5-minute standing ovation upon its debut there, and this film has a concept that we have seen recently get a bit of a revival, or at least more exposure to, involving music. Whether it is a biopic based on a real-life figure, like with last year's Bohemian Rhapsody focusing on Freddie Mercury/Queen, this year's Rocketman focusing on Elton John, which that film is one of my favorite movies of the year thus far, or even other more obscure original concepts like Yesterday from earlier this summer, which does center around the music from the Beatles, and even later this year we are getting Last Christmas, which a trailer for that film played before I saw Blinded by the Light, and that movie is going to focus on the music of George Michael, or at least have it sprinkled throughout its narrative. And now we have Blinded by the Light, and this, as I mentioned earlier, is centered around the music of Bruce Springsteen. He's an artist that I like. I'm not the biggest fan of him, but I cannot deny his talent, and he's had a bunch of catchy songs be released, like Born in the USA, Dancing in the Dark, Born to Run. Yeah, all that kind of stuff I do enjoy. So, with this movie being a film that does take his music and center a narrative around it, and specifically with the culture that our main character is of, this did get me a lot more interested to see it. Starting out with the cast and their performances, we have Vivek Kalra as Javeed. Now, this guy I've never seen in any other works prior to this film, but I've got to say, he was fantastic here. He is a teenager who very much is trying to come into his own as a person, despite the family he is with. As I mentioned, he's a British Pakistani Muslim teen who is trying to get into university and get out of the small town of Luton where he is living, and he's aspiring to be a writer as well. Then he discovers the music of Bruce Springsteen, and his entire worldview is changed forever. This performance is one that is very uplifting, I would say, and also very charismatic too. This guy is very likable, and seeing him in his element and him trying to discover himself and also build himself up to be the man that he wants to be is a journey that I found myself quite invested by. Other members of the cast here include Hayley Atwell as Miss Clay. She's the English teacher of Javeed's who encourages him to keep up his writing and poetry so he can make something out of it. She's the only member of the cast that I recognized right off the bat, and I always enjoy seeing her in anything she does. She is very good here. There's also Kulvinder Gill and Meera Ganatra as the parents to Javeed, and seeing their performances and seeing more of the culture that Javeed is a part of, that being again of Pakistani heritage. At first I thought the performances played out like the typical disapproving parents, but at the same time we do eventually get to see their side, specifically the dad's side of what he has gone through. The dad specifically loses his job early on in the film as a result of the time period that these characters are living in. So as the movie does progress, we get to see a more well-rounded view of the family and other characters as a whole. So I thought that they were strong in that regard. We also have Nell Williams as Eliza, the fellow classmate and love interest of Javid. I knew I recognized her from somewhere previously, and when I looked up her filmography, I found out, oh, she played the young Cersei Lannister in Game of Thrones in one episode. So there's that, but I thought she was quite cute and adorable here. And then we have other standouts here, such as Aaron Fagura as Roops, a fellow Pakistani student of Javid's who introduces him. He's the one who introduces him to Bruce Springsteen's music. I thought he was quite solid. Dean Charles Chapman is the neighbor and best friend to Javid named Matt. And then there's also Rob Brydon as his dad. I thought he was funny. I also thought that Chapman as Matt was quite nice here too. Basically everyone in the cast I think gives some pretty strong performances, but I think the standout of course is Vivek Kalra as Javid. The writing of this film was actually partially adapted by the author of the memoir in which this movie is based off of. Again, that guy is Sarfraz Manzoor, and the other two writers on this film are Gurdinger Chadha, who is the movie's director, and Paul Maeda Burgess. And what all three of these writers did in setting up this movie's narrative was not only make it clear and that this takes place in 1987 Britain, where Margaret Thatcher is the prime minister, but also have the narrative be shaped in us seeing the cogs turn in Javid's head, in him living with his family, struggling to make ends meet while he has other further aspirations. And then once he discovers the music of Bruce Springsteen, the whole movie does change and it does get into a more specific sense of style. This narrative, balancing both sides of what this movie is trying to tell, I think is one of the biggest pros with it. With, again, the main focus being on Javid and him coming into his own, given how this is a coming-of-age dramedy film. But then the other side is the world that he is living in and trying to either just get through with it or trying to find a way to get out of it. So with that, this movie has a lot of things that do parallel into today's day and age, despite taking place in 1987, and Margaret Thatcher was the then current British Prime Minister. As we see how life has taken a toll on other characters, either in the background or some of our main players. And this is not just economically, it's also politically and socially, as again, our main character here is a British Pakistani Muslim teen, and throughout the film, him and other Pakistani characters are discriminated against, and it shows that we are always going to live in a world where racism, prejudice, and all-around hate are going to be rampant no matter where you are. I mean, I live in the United States and I see a lot of stuff involving those topics highly publicized on a daily basis, almost on an hourly basis as it seems. But this movie also has a very inspirationally resonant sense to itself, and that is where the incorporation of Bruce Springsteen's music does come in to a very big advantage too, as when we see his famous hits get used in the film, we get to see them literally come alive, with the lyrics either swirling around Javid's head, be projected on walls, and just be shown all around while he is listening to them on his Walkman device. It's something that does make for a very charismatic viewing experience. You just see how this music just speaks to our lead character. And that is what a lot of great music and some of our favorite music does with any one of us. I mean, we have all of our favorite artists and songs that speak to us personally. And I think this is something that Gurdinger Chadha, our movie's director again, does with such a very focused degree. Chadha is actually no stranger to directing projects such as this one of a similar topic, as she has previously directed movies such as Bend It Like Beckham. That movie is about a young Indian girl who loves playing soccer, or excuse me, football, since that also takes place in the UK, but her family disapproves of that, yet she really has a big passion for the sport. Similar attributes apply to Blinded by the Light, and when we see the narrative progress, that is where some of the more musical aspects of the movie do apply, and the integration of Springsteen's music, as I just said, as the movie takes a slight fantastical approach in using the songs, as well as characters do randomly break into song at certain points in the film, but it's not to the extent of something like Rocket Man, where it is something that is so very outlandish or fantastical in telling the life story of a character like Elton John, or even to the point of Yesterday from earlier this summer as well, where we get to see just the Beatles music take over the narrative and really become a celebration of it, which Blinded by the Light is also a celebration of Springsteen's music, of course. Speaking of Yesterday as well, while I did enjoy that movie, some of the main issues with the film did have to do with the movie's logic becoming less and less sound as the movie progressed, but Blinded by the Light is more grounded than that. Yes, as I mentioned, characters do randomly break out into song and sing the famous hits of Springsteen, but there is an edge to that as well that does make it just utterly so toe-tapping and so engrossing too, because you get to see how much passion that Javid and other characters have when blasting this music and going around and just feeling like themselves, feeling like that they are living their best lives. And that is something that I think will captivate audiences in watching it too, along with the rest of the atmosphere and aura that this movie has, as this goes into the rest of the technical merits of this movie. It isn't just Bruce Springsteen hits that we hear throughout this film. Artists like Cutting Crew and the Pet Shop Boys also have some of their own songs interspliced with the movie's narrative, along with a bunch of other hits from the 1980s. The fashion and the overall look of this movie makes it clear that it does take place in this time period, and I thought it looked pretty authentic, to say the least. That also reminded me of John Carney's Sing Street from a few years ago while watching Blinded by the Light, between its 1980s setting as well, it taking place in the UK, and it being about a similar main character who is trying to come into his own as well through music. I think that anyone who is into that narrative, as I was, will be into Blinded by the Light as well. With the way this movie is shot, it is pretty standardly done in that regard. I mean, it's nothing flashy or too showy, as the budget of this film was about $15 million. So this is an independent film, so some of the cheapness does show in between, especially with some scene transitions or even some graphics cutting in and out of the film. But I don't think it was really anything to really give a big gaffe to. And if I have to give any more gripes that I have with this film, it mainly has to do with some of the supporting characters. There are quite a few of them, as I mentioned with the cast and the performances earlier, but some of them are absent or cut in and out of the narrative at certain points, such as Javid's best friend Matt, who is absent for a good chunk of the movie before he comes back into it. It mainly has to do with one of the interactions that they had around halfway through the film, but either way, some of them are underdeveloped or underutilized. It's mainly focusing on Javid either way, and also the relationship that he has between himself and his family. So the focus being mostly on that shows what this movie was mainly concerned in trying to parlay onto us. And at just under 2 hours in its running time, I felt that this movie was well paced throughout. It mainly has to do with the energy of this movie running rampant when the Springsteen songs do come into play, and me just getting more into the plight that Javid is trying to get through and having a life to build for himself, so that he is somebody who can fully embrace who he is, as he is so inspired by the hits of The Boss. And with that all being said, I really enjoyed Blinded by the Light. This is such a feel-good movie, as Yesterday was as well, and this is something that I think a lot of us really need right now. It does have a lot of timeliness with it in the current day and age that we are living in. No matter where you are, there is a bit of turmoil that does occur on an everyday basis, and with the current political climate that some of us are living in, it is pretty telling. But it's such an irresistible and ear-warming film that I cannot see very many people not liking it unless you have a heart of stone. And even if you are not a fan of Bruce Springsteen's music, there is something in here for everybody to get out of, whether it is relating to the family narrative, relating to Bruce Springsteen's music, or just seeing the all-around essence that this movie has in being a coming-of-age dramedy with musical elements in there. This is a movie that I think a lot of people will be into. And it does make me somewhat nervous to see how this movie will perform in the near future, as this is one of 5 new wide releases here in the US, and I fear that this movie is either gonna underperform or worse, bomb, if it doesn't find an audience in theaters. This movie has already been playing in theaters for over a week now in its native UK. But in any case, if you're looking for a film that will liven your spirits up after you have finished watching it, I definitely recommend Blinded by the Light. My final verdict for Blinded by the Light is 4 out of 5 stars. Thank you all, as always, for watching. Be sure to like this video, comment on what you thought of Blinded by the Light. Social media links in the description. Subscribe to my channel for more, and I'll catch you on the next movie review.